Hey, there's the questions. So let's have a look at what we've got here. I'm going to try and move this just a little bit over so I don't get quite so much glare. There we go. Um, Brian Yoder has, again, I'm just going through the comments as they're listed. This is listed by most relevant, but I like this first question. The first question is Brian Yoder, boycott Gillette, question mark. As it turns out, um, and the forums are coming back to the question that somebody. I'm sorry, just sometimes I'll glance over there. We're going to go back to Discus with the comments available right there on each one of the listings and stuff. Anyway, Brian Yoder has got a little thing there, a hashtag boycott Gillette, and reason I'm interested in that is because. Scott asked me a question about this today on Bill Whittle Now this morning at Dark 30. We started shooting about 6 o'clock a.m. Today, um, and and I haven't seen it yet, but Gillette has basically gone woke and has basically said that that all of their advertising and so on now are going to be designed to eliminate the entire idea of toxic masculinity. And toxic masculinity is a term used by beta males and feminists to describe masculinity. Um, that's what toxic masculinity is to them. They think that toxic masculinity is rape and assault, but the actual terms for rape and assault are rape and assault. Uh, this is this is not masculinity. There's no question that most of the rape, for all of the rape essentially, and most of the assault is committed by males. There's no question about that, but that's not masculinity. And what Gillette is doing is they are basically kowtowing to the PC police and saying that we're no longer going to be promoting, traditional masculine values, which is, again, a beta male and feminist way of saying, since we can't do these things, we're going to make them seem like psychological pathologies. And when I say can't do them, I mean not capable of doing them. It is it is yet another step on the suicide of companies that have decided to go down the social justice warrior road. ESPN and the NFL both decided that they would take a political position that would endear them to Berkeley, studies professors and Antifa hooligans and radical feminists. They decided that that was the political tone they were going to take at the expense of the political tone of people who would just like to watch some football games and not have to be subjected to this bombardment all the time. And this is an interesting business decision because while they're changed their tone and their content to please Berkeley professors, as it at the expense of regular working class Americans, as it turns out, Berkeley professors don't actually watch a lot of football. Uh, so, one of the things that I saw that's related to this was came out last week, and I don't know if it's the American Psychiatric Association or something, but basically, what we consider to be masculinity is now being defined as a psychological aberration. It's pretty soon it'll be a disorder. They were saying these traditional ideas of masculinity forcing young boys to not cry like we forced them, but advising them that it's probably better not to cry, at least not cry now, maybe later, but right now there's an emergency going on, and if you're over there sobbing, then who's going to do what needs to be done? That is harming them psychologically and causing them deep emotional stress. And we find that kind of traditional masculinity provides all kinds of other pathological behaviors, which were identified by these psychologists as risk-taking behavior, because God knows you wouldn't want to take a risk, not today when everything's perfect. No reason to take a risk today when nobody dies and nothing bad ever happens. So risk-taking behavior is defined as a psychological pathology generated by toxic masculinity. I'm not making this up. I wish I was. Actually, I don't. I'm glad they're doing this. What else? Aggressive behavior, which they're defining as basically putting your own personal desires and having personal desires and then wanting to go and achieve those personal desires. That's another. Psychological condition, a psychological impairment or pathology that's a result of this traditional view of masculinity and so on. And so you have to ask yourself a couple questions about this position on the part of Gillette and NFL and let's add one more because I was doing a little studying about this. Sometimes I find all I watch is YouTube and user-generated content. I have not watched any network TV in a long time, but I try to see as much YouTube stuff as I possibly can. And I've been paying more and more attention to watching video game commenters. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole thing again, so everybody relax, take a breath. We're not going to go down that whole road again, but let me tell you why I think this is interesting. By me listening to what the video gamer community is saying, I am listening to the people who are going to be running the country someday. I'm listening to the cohort that is actually voting now and will continue to vote for decades, assuming that the country lives long enough for that. And so it is important to get a sense of what the future is bringing in terms of political attitudes. And I'm not aware, I'm not saying that there's no one else doing it, I'm just saying I'm not aware of anyone else who is in this space. I don't know of anybody else in the conservative movement who's looking 20 years downstream or 10 years downstream. I see people fighting battles now. I don't see anybody looking at what's coming. So here's what's interesting about what's coming. I've spent some time talking about how generally left-wing millennials are leaving society and going into the world of computer games so they can escape left-wing politics and be heroes. I've talked about the fury and the anger and the rage generated by the left's destruction of Star Wars, destruction of Star Wars through feminism and through the, so you've got the whole Admiral Purple Hair or whatever, Admiral Akbar, who's actually an interesting character, just he's blown away into the void and we don't even know he's gone until somebody says he's gone. Thanks. So we know that fighter pilots are supposed to control their out-of-control emotions and not go out and actually fight the enemy. The thing to do is to go back to their cabin because the women have all this figured out. And when it turns out that brilliant plan conceived of by Admiral What's-Her-Name and Princess, Princess, had some work done, when that results in the essential destruction of the rebellion, we're still told that the idea of going out there and fighting evil in a fighter plane and being outnumbered horribly and committing acts of bravery and daring, which is kind of a toxic masculine kind of thing to do as a general rule. So they're mad about that. But let me tell you a little bit about the latest thing that I see that they're mad about. There are a number of game titles that are called AAA titles, and they're called AAA titles because they're put out by the biggest studios, the biggest developers, generally like a game releasing company like Activision or Electronic Arts or Bethesda. I'm not so sure about Bethesda, but take Electronic Arts, which is probably the most despised company in America today. What they do is they develop games, they put money into games, and then they sell the games, but they generally farm the games out to development studios. And one of the, I may be wrong about these, I'm pretty sure I'm right, but somebody will correct me if I'm wrong. So EA has put out a series called Battlefield, which was pretty successful. It's a sort of a challenger to the Call of Duty series, which are all first-person shooters that allow young men and women to vicariously experience combat, and sometimes pretty vicariously. I have had experiences in those kind of games where I was just plain terrified. So here's what happened. They made these Battlefield games, and they did very, very well. And I'm rounding the numbers, but they're not terribly far off. A couple years ago, they released a game called Battlefield 1, which was a World War I shooter, which has not really done very much before. And that did very, very well. And already they were starting to put the developer, DICE, I think, was starting to put their PC stamp on things even back 2 years ago with Battlefield 1, because you were seeing not just like occasional screenshots. The artwork was featuring like black soldiers in World War I. And people were saying, listen, we don't have any problem with black soldiers. We deal with black soldiers in Halo and all of these feature set games and in all the fantasy games. It's not that. It's just, it's a little odd to see, the World War II trenches filled with black soldiers, because generally speaking in France, there weren't a whole lot of black soldiers there. And the response of the studio was, well, as it turned out, you ignorant racist, there were black soldiers serving in World War I, so go stuff your racism somewhere else, to which people have replied, while it is true there were black soldiers serving in World War I, they were serving in Africa, and so on. But with that said, it wasn't too intrusive, and Battlefield 1 did really well and made a lot of money, and I want to say it was $3.5 billion, something like that, 4 almost. That's a pretty big deal. Now, you let 2 more years or 3 more years of social justice pressures accrue, and you come to the release of Battlefield 5. Now, Battlefield 5 is a World War II shooter, and highly anticipated World War II shooter, because the one thing you can say about the Battlefield games are their graphics are unparalleled. They're masterpieces. But the release I really wish I'd thought of it to tee it up. This is the problem with not knowing what the questions are going to be before I take them. But if you get a chance, look this up. It's really quite funny. I'm sure somebody will post it in the comments section and probably in the YouTube section comments as well. If you look at the release trailer for Battlefield 5, it's essentially about the Western Front in World War II. It's basically the American army fighting the Nazis. And the release trailer showing you the incredible epic gameplay of that Battlefield 5 was going to consist of, featured a woman, not U.S. soldiers, a woman in kind of resistance kind of clothes, and she's backing up across a field, and she's got a machine gun, and there are these Tiger tanks coming through the walls, and she's ducking around them, and then she gets up, and there's a Nazi there, and she ends up killing this guy with a cricket bat with barbed wire wrapped around it, and just bashes this guy's head in, covered with blood. And as the woman's standing there, you realize that it's not only a 5'2" woman, it's a 5'2" woman with a prosthetic arm, with a World War II era wooden prosthetic arm with a club, with which she has beaten the daylights out of a 200-pound SS guy, because Democrats. And when the fans saw this trailer, they really said, this has gone far enough. The whole idea of this reinforces my entire operational theory. The quality that video games are most prized for, no matter what the video game is, the quality that is most prized in any game is what we term immersion. And immersion is the sense that the environment is not necessarily real enough or accurate enough, but it's compelling enough and it's consistent enough so that we lose ourselves in the game. We're no longer sitting at a table in our parents' basements looking at a screen. We are now driving over the sand dunes on Daymar, or we're walking through a trench in Flanders, or we're doing whatever we're doing, but we're inside the game. We're not looking at the game. We're in the game. It is the entire goal of a game, especially a video game, Immersion is what a well-run Dungeons and Dragons game did, but I think with the power of video graphics, far more powerful. In Dungeons and Dragons, what you're trying to do is have a bunch of people who are sitting around a table with dice and things in their laps find a way to mentally teleport their consciousness to a world where they are inside a dungeon fighting dragons with magic spells and powerful swords. In That's what immersion is, and that's why people play games. They want to get away from this world. They want to go into a different world, whatever that world may be. So here's where it gets really interesting. So, needless to say, the fans are saying a disabled woman who's missing an arm is going to be the featured character in the release of the. It's not just like a cutaway shot or one of many. This is what you're going to give us in order to sell the game. And now we're down to the brass tacks because the studio knew that this was going to piss people off, knew it, and they did it anyway. They basically spit in the face of the fans on purpose. And it's not just a question of them thinking, hey, it would be nice if everybody had a better attitude towards inclusion of women and disabled people. That's not their attitude. Their attitude is, I think it's better to have to destroy historical accuracy and immersion in order to make a point I want to make about female empowerment and empowering the disabled. And it's not like I'm trying to educate you on this. It's that you will do what I say you're going to do, you ignorant, racist, homophobe, supremacist. And then you begin to see what these people actually think of us. And as it turns out, it's not very high opinion. So the controversy starts to grow, and I can give you a couple of little snapshots from this because it applies to the whole culture. This is just a really good example of what's happening along lines of the Gillette campaign. So there's some blowback from the fans saying, my kind of understanding was that when you were, parachuting into Normandy with 101st Airborne, that it wasn't a 50% female crew, and hearing female voices in combat is pulling me out of this game, because if I wanted to play a game where there are female characters as female characters, I'll play Halo, or I'll play something in the future, or I'll play Fortnite or something like that. But I'm not. But World War II is where I'm trying to be here now in my head, and every time I hear this voice, it just takes me out of the game. The response of the studio was, you woman-hating bigot. The pretty much verbatim response. The studio director of this game said something that was so perfect in terms of how these people think. It was just such a perfect statement. And it tells you everything you need to know about these people. First of all, I'll tell you the statement. I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty close to this. So the guy who's developing Battlefield 5 and who's including all of these female characters and disabled characters and all the rest of this stuff in an actual historical background says, well, let me tell you about the whole female character thing. We showed a test version of this game to my little daughter. First of all, I don't believe you, but this is what he said. And we showed her a test version of the game, and my little 7-year-old daughter said to me, Dad, why isn't there anybody in this game that looks like me? I play Fortnite, and there's people in Fortnite that look like me. Why is there nobody in your game who looks like me? And then the director of the studio said, how am I going to answer a question like that? How am I going to tell my little girl that she can't be a combat soldier in World War II? So that's why we put the female characters in there. And I wasn't the first to comment on this. A number of gamer commenters have talked about this, but basically, a lot of people have said, how am I going to explain this to my daughter? And many people have said, well, here's one way you could do it. Honey, this game took place in 1944, 1945, and there were no women on the front because way back then, in the days of toxic masculinity, it was pretty much assumed by everybody that young men were going to go out there and get killed so that young women wouldn't have to be killed. That's pretty much what that entire toxic masculinity, and all of those hateful things that I've tried to protect you from. That value system is fortunately gone now. Now you're just as perfectly willing and able to go out there and get yourself blown to atoms as anybody else, except you won't, because we all know that if that actually happened, then we'd go back to this horrible toxic male environment, which basically says the men are going to grab their pitchforks and run towards the lifelong warriors who've been practicing with swords since they were 2, and they're going to run towards those guys on horseback, and they're going to die, slowing them down with the hope that it may allow some of the women and children to get away. And this is what you might have said to your daughter. So when the guy says, how do I explain to my daughter that there are no women characters in this game, therefore we're going to put women characters in the game? First of all, I don't believe him. I just don't believe the story. I don't believe it. But let's just say it happened that way. You could say, well, Chardonnay, this is a historical game, and this is what actually happened. So let's just continue the story. So they came out with that statement. And then, once again, the studio said, it's incredible to us that there are some bigots out there who don't understand that women fought in World War II. Uneducated bigots don't understand that there were, in fact, women fighting in World War II, which is basically telling your entire user base you're a racist and a misogynist and a bigot, because the idea that 50% of your band of brothers is actually a band of sisters. It's just not true, and you know it. But the fact that you say something about it means you're not only a bigot, but you're uneducated. To which the player community said, well, there are, in fact, stories of Russian snipers who are females. Some of them did an amazing job. He killed 200-300 guys, some of these Russian snipers. But these are not the stories that you're telling. You're not telling the story of a women's action, women's combat units, which were rare but existed in the Eastern Front. You're injecting this into the Western Front, and it's not real, and it didn't happen. And every time I have this experience of walking up this beach on D-Day and hearing all these women yelling and screaming, I'm no longer on the beach in D-Day. I'm wondering why somebody's trying to force their ideology down my throat. So even though there were actual stories of actual women, and look, I don't know how much of a game this is, but just so we're crystal clear on this, it seemed like virtually every single aircraft that was delivered to Europe for 2 or 3 years was flown there by women in pitch blackness with no navigational aids and no no de-icing systems to speak about. There's incredible stories to be told about this, but this isn't one of them, and it's demeaning to invent stories. But now we're really down to the point. The point is that here's how I think the chain of thinking, such as it is, works. It's part of the progressive. It's not part of the progressive worldview. Whirlpool is probably better. It's not part of it. The entire progressive view of the world is this: the world will be made into what we want it to be made into, and if we want it to be made into something badly enough, then that is what we are going to have happen. The world will follow what we wish it to be, and a bunch of very angry feminists who I am quite sure in most cases, if you asked a typical feminist versus your typical progressive feminist, professional feminist, and you asked your typical church-going conservative housewife, or wife for that matter, forget housewife, businesswoman, whatever. If you asked 100 of each one of these groups about what they thought about their father, you'd get very different responses, and And so I know that this is driven by this psychological neuroses on their part. But as feminists get angry, the fact that males and females are different is not enough for them. The fact that they get to bear children, the fact that they have any number of biological advantages is not enough for them. In their rage and their inferiority, they have to be able to do everything, which means that women cannot just be female characters, and they can't just be things that actually do exist that nobody in the gaming community or I have any problems with, is such things as female fighter pilots, female helicopter pilots. There was an Apache pilot in Iraq who was a woman who was just driving them nuts because she was just killing all. No, it's not that. They have to be able to do everything that men do and essentially do it better, because not only are they as strong and as fast and as tough as men, but they're also considerably smarter and more under control and all the rest of this stuff, more under control. Just think about that for a second. We saw in that Star Wars movie these two women, middle-aged women, who were ice cold and totally emotionally under control in a combat situation, while the men were running around hysterically. At least that's the point that Kathleen Kennedy will have you believe. In my experience in life is things don't work out quite that way. So, the gamer community is starting to get a little upset about this. And then one person wrote something that was really telling, and it was not in an antagonistic way. He wrote the developers of Battlefield 5, and he said, listen, since all of these female characters and stuff are essentially just a skin, you've got a skeleton of a character that's moving, and you can either make it a female character or a male character. The artificial intelligence that runs it and all the ballistics and all the other stuff doesn't care. He said, could we have a switch? Could you put in the game a box that we could check, where if we wanted to, we'd check the historical accuracy box, and in a case like that, then we would just have essentially, white Germans and white, primarily white male American forces. And the response to the studio, and this is a direct quote, to the idea of having a checkbox to turn on the reality and to turn off these female soldiers that didn't exist, one of the developers wrote back and said, should we put that box above or below the box that you check for white people only? See what they did there? It's racist and sexist for you to even ask for a reality button. And so here we go. So the reason that they have to go and change the past, the reason that they did this to Battlefield 5 is they can't change the present if they don't change the past. This is the major theme, sub-theme anyway, of 1984 by Orwell, who understood socialism and collectivists and totalitarians very, very well. You can't change the present if you don't go back and change the past, because if you don't change the past is constantly reminding you that things were different. And so, since feminists need to believe that anything, and not just feminists, progressives, since progressives need to believe that if they want something to be true enough, then it will be true, then they must want women to be as strong, as fast, as quick, as tough as men, because they want it to be that case. And since they want it to be that way, that also must be true. And if it's therefore true that women are just as great soldiers, and as we've said 100 times on this show, Scarlett Johansson, who's 5'2" and 100 pounds soaking wet, if she cannot beat up a 220-pound SS guy by herself with her bare fists, then you're saying that such a thing is not possible. And if you're saying that something like that is not possible, you're also saying that there are other things that are not possible. And some of these things that are not possible are things like having free healthcare because healthcare isn't free, and having everybody share things because people don't. And the idea that socialist leaders care about the people when in point of fact they die with $800 million like Fidel Castro, or $4.2 billion like Hugo Chavez's daughter. And see, if you have reality intruding anywhere in the present or in the past, you can't remake the world according to the way you wish it to be, because that pesky reality. gets in the way. And so if you're going to have a fantasy present, you have to have the same fantasy standards apply to the past. And essentially, it's doing what they do. It's erasing history. They are not just erasing, that'd be one thing. They're rewriting history. And there will be a generation which has already arrived that simply doesn't understand, has no way of knowing that Han shot first, and have no way of knowing that women weren't equal partners on the World War II battlefields, because that's all they've ever seen and all they've ever been allowed to see. So how does this tie in with Gillette? Well, it ties in like this. Basically, the game studio and EA said, look, we're tired of arguing about this whole female character thing. That's the game. That's the way we're going to deliver the game. And you can either buy it or not buy it. And they had somebody posted it on Twitter, because all the developers are incredibly left-wing. Like I say, which button do you want us to check the white supremacy box there first, or you would, you know? So they had a release party, a private release party for this Battlefield 5 thing, and up on the wall, you know, where they put Battlefield 5 title, and it's kind of the photographic center of the piece. There's all these things, and next to them are all these quotes from pissed off gamers saying feminism is destroying the world, and whatever happened to reality. In other words, at the internal release party for this game, they're openly mocking the players, openly mocking them. And what they're basically doing is saying, we are much more advanced than the people who we are creating this product for. And these poor, stupid, bigoted rubes, and they're not, these poor, uneducated, stupid people who we constantly have to try and educate are just not capable of it. So this is the game, and if you don't like it, don't buy it. And guess what happened? They didn't buy it. Battlefield 5 is a quarter of the sales, a third of the sales at the most of Battlefield 1. It's an absolute sales catastrophe. They've twice had to revise their stock, their income projections downward, which caused their stock price to half. And they're mystified. They can't figure out why this happened. It's an absolute mystery. Calling your fan base a bunch of haters and women haters and bigots and uneducated idiots, when in point of fact, they're none of those things. Well, if you don't like it, don't buy the game. Okay, so they didn't. Star Wars said the same thing. They said, hey, look, if you don't like The Last Jedi, that's the Force is female, so there you go. If you don't like it, then just don't go see Solo. And so people didn't. And you would think that this would lead people to see the light and change. But you see, here's where we get to the really interesting stuff. It's not only do the progressives not care that they've destroyed Star Wars and that they've destroyed Battlefield and that they've destroyed Star Trek and others. Not only do they not care that they've destroyed billion-dollar franchises and the deeply held beliefs and affections of hundreds of millions of people. Not only do they not care about that, if you ran a business and you did something to piss off all your customers, you would presumably do something as quickly as you could in the other direction and try and get them back with as little extra pain as possible. But they don't care. So it's like they destroy Star Wars, and then Star Wars goes away, and it's not like now they're sorry or they're going to present an alternative Star Wars. It's just dead. It's gone. It's destroyed. Okay, good. Next, Boy Scouts. We're going to make the Boy Scouts into something so opposed to what the Boy Scouts are about, is that no one will be able to go to the Boy Scouts anymore. Certainly our kids aren't going to the Boy Scouts because we don't have kids. We're wheatgrass drinking Berkeley radicals who have a large number of cats. So we'll destroy the Boy Scouts and we'll replace it with nothing, because it's It's not about changing the Boy Scouts. It's about destroying the Boy Scouts. So we'll destroy the Boy Scouts. And after we destroy the Boy Scouts, we'll destroy the NFL. And we'll destroy ESPN. And we'll destroy everything that doesn't feature our philosophy, because we have to. Because if somebody hears reality transposed against what we're telling them is true, any idiot, even a progressive, can figure out that this whole thing's just a stack of lies perpetuated by people who are deeply neurotic, very seriously flawed in many, many ways, and who are incapable of things that traditional males are capable of, things like courage and coolness under fire and under pressure, things like the ability to be violent when the situation demands it, but not violent when the situation doesn't, to be able to tell the difference between somebody who deserves something and somebody who doesn't, to be able to tell the difference from the weak and the strong, and then be able to have the courage, the physical courage, not the moral courage, the physical courage to go and act. They can't do any of these things, and since they can't do any of these things, they have decided to portray all of this stuff as a pathology and destroy it as deeply and as quickly as they can. So all of this to say that the socialist, self-identified, progressive, Democrat, Bernie-supporting millennial generation is so bloody sick of this. They're so fed up and so angry and so disgusted at it that even without our side doing anything, because we're incapable of doing anything that is, socially relevant, the conservative answer to the pop culture turning left is for us to go, well, and walk away. All right. Well, I'm not doing that, but everybody else is. So yes, so Gillette has decided to go down the same road as ESPN and the NFL, down the same road as Battlefield 5, down the same road as Star Wars, down the same road, and telling the people who actually shave that the mere fact that you have to shave your face is an indication that there's something biologically wrong with you, and we're going to do our level best to make sure that the products you use to shave your face, because you got that Y chromosome thing, we're going to do our very best to make sure that you understand that all of your instincts and all of your imperatives and all of the things that you cherish are not only not the things that we cherish, but they're morally despicable, and they are shameful. And we're going to make sure that when you buy our product, we're going to give you a steady dose of what a horrible person you are. Get woke, go broke. Sarah Hoyt described the process. It's roll left and die. You make a decision to go to the far left because the people on the far left make enough noise and generate enough tweets that doesn't matter to anybody. The far left can back Colin Kaepernick to the skies, and the NFL's position should have been, what do we care? These people don't watch football. Maybe we should actually cater to the people that watch football, but they don't do that. They get suckered into this, morality trap, this idea that, this is the future, and no, it's not the future. It's not the future. That's one thing we can be sure of. One thing we can be sure of is that progressivism is not the future, because progressivism's been around since 150 BC, and every time that you let progressives take control of things, people die in large numbers, and that society essentially becomes extinct. So progressivism is not the future. It is the absolute assurance that there will be no future. And when you get into a company like Gillette, Andrew, Gillette is a shaving company that makes razors for men. This is not the kind of company that you would think should or would be taking a position that their customers are savages and jerks and bigots and uneducated, and we're going to do you the favor of telling you what a horrible person you are as you buy our product. So, I think we're really at the point now as a society where even people who are even decent conservative people who are appropriately enough offended by open profanity. I really think we're at the point where if somebody was on a national stage, or if I was in a debate with somebody and they started talking about toxic masculinity, I think we're at the point now where the only real response is, you know what, just F off. Okay, we're done caring. We don't care about your neurotic behavior. Just go F yourself, honestly. At this point, that's all you get from me. Go F yourself. And take the rest of this beta, gamma, and omega male crowd with you. And the reason I know I'm right is because I moved to where the evidence is, and the evidence says that even the most progressive women out there, the shrill Antifa, white privilege screaming, neurotic, exceeding. By the way, has anybody noticed how unhappy these people are? When your entire mission in life is to point out injustice, that's all you do. You, by definition, cannot be happy. If you're happy, then all of a sudden you're out of identity. These are the most miserable people in the world. But even these incredibly miserable, shallow, stupid young women admit that they find the beta males that do these kind of things, like Pajama Boy, they completely have no sexual interest in them whatsoever. You can only imagine my surprise. This is why P.J. O'Rourke did so much to bring me to conservatism, because P.J. O'Rourke wrote in the foreword of one of his books, he says, now I'm a Republican and, I get called a Nazi, and that's okay with me because I know in my heart of hearts that no woman ever had a fantasy of being tied up and ravaged by a man dressed like a liberal. And there you go. So anyway, I haven't seen the ad. I'll see it. I'll look at it, and I'm sure it's going to be fun. The further out these people get, the better it is for us. The further out these people go with this nonsense, the more people will realize that this is just plain insane. So anyway, so much for that. Let's see, moving on.